Introduction. That day, it wasn't the tsunami that killed first. It was the silence, the compliance. Every delayed decision, every averted gaze, every cold directive. A nation was warned but never warned its own people. A train was dispatched as if nothing was wrong. When the wave hit 1,700 lives were swept away by blind faith in a system. But the true cause of death didn't lie in the rail cars. It lived in how society forgives those who should be held accountable. This was not an accident. This was a reckoning. And to understand why 1,700 people died, not from water but from the system, we must confront the truth. When the system goes silent, nature speaks. Train T50 departed during Sri Lanka's Grand Festival, carrying over 1,700 people who had no idea they were heading straight into disaster. An island nation lying directly on the seismic belt, yet there was no tsunami warning system. A 9.3 magnitude earthquake was detected at 5 a.m., but no one acted. No one stopped the train, no one evacuated, no one warned. While the world had gone into red alert, the Queen of the Sea rumbled steadily toward hell, unaware of the wrath rising from the ocean ahead. We're not talking about an accident. We're talking about betrayal on a systemic level. A government that knew the risk but did nothing to stop it. A transportation authority aware. It was sending people toward the shoreline, yet still approved the journey as usual. When power chooses silence, the tsunami speaks. And it doesn't just sweep away rail cars. It washes away faith in stability, in procedures, in the so-called default safety of public services. Don't blame nature. The tsunami was only the trigger. What truly killed was complacency, delayed reaction, and a lack of accountability. Had someone issued a stop order just 15 minutes earlier, the train wouldn't have become a mass grave. But no one wanted responsibility. No one wanted to be criticized. So they kept silent and let the waves speak instead. This was not a natural disaster. This was a test of ethics, and the entire system failed it catastrophically before the eyes of the world. The illusion of safety cost them their lives. When the train stopped unexpectedly at Paralia village, no one ran. Why? Because they believed the train was safer than land. That single assumption, so simple, so naive, killed nearly everyone on board. No safety briefing, no evacuation orders. No one trained in emergency response. Just one giant steel coffin sitting on the tracks waiting. People believed the massive train would withstand whatever came. But the ocean doesn't care how big your vehicle is. It only respects preparation, and these people had none. 3 waves hit. The first was powerful but not deadly. The second, stronger, ripped the train from its tracks. The third was annihilation. Toa after toa crushed, twisted, and stacked like matchboxes. Survivors described the sound as if a skyscraper collapsed into the sea. There was no warning siren, no last-minute intervention, only confusion, screams, and then silence. Hundreds died without ever knowing why. Because they trusted in the wrong structure. Because they stayed when they should have fled. Safety is a myth when it's not built on readiness. No matter how heavy the train or expensive the infrastructure, it is useless without communication, awareness, and accountability. You can't assume steel will save you. It is not walls that protect people, but systems. And that system in Sri Lanka had already failed long before the water arrived. The passengers never stood a chance, because the real collapse wasn't metal, it was trust. Bureaucracy buried them before the waves did. The warnings were there. Seismic centers across Asia sounded the alarm. India, Thailand, Indonesia all activated protocols. But Sri Lanka's government didn't. Why? Because no official wanted to break protocol. Because there was no tsunami manual. So they did nothing. They waited for paperwork. They asked for confirmation. Meanwhile, the waves were already on the move, racing toward the island at jet speed. By the time any action could have mattered, it was too late. The system wasn't slow. It was paralyzed by its own rules. Local leaders lacked authority. National officials waited for international validation. The decision to stop trains stuck in a chain of command with no end. And so 1,700 lives were caught between departments. When disaster strikes, bureaucracy becomes a weapon of delay. And that delay kills more efficiently than any wave. In times of crisis, indecision is murder. A warning ignored is a choice. Choosing to wait and see is choosing to let people die. The train wasn't doomed by fate, it was doomed by a refusal to act. This was not a lack of resources. It was a lack of courage. When leadership chooses caution over urgency, disaster becomes genocide by negligence. Silence isn't neutral, it's complicity. Why didn't anyone shout? Why didn't the conductors scream for passengers to evacuate? Why didn't any officer defy orders to save lives? Because in a system where obedience is rewarded, silence becomes the norm. Nobody dared raise their voice, not out of malice, but out of habit. Generations trained to follow, not to think, to wait for command, not to act with conscience. And that's exactly how silence turns lethal, not as a glitch, but as a feature. In a functioning system, someone would have defied protocol. Someone would have chosen chaos over compliance. But here, silence was polished professionalism. The crew didn't abandon their post because they didn't know they could. The passengers stayed because no one screamed fire. And when the water arrived, they died in perfect order. A civilization that praises obedience over initiative births perfect victims. This isn't just about a train. It's about any system that teaches people to shut up and fit in. The silence before impact wasn't peaceful, it was rehearsed. Manufactured by years of fear-based discipline. If no one breaks the silence, the wave always wins. True safety isn't silence. It's the courage to scream when no one else dares. M612, when the military kills soldiers with foolish orders. December 1917. The M612 ship set sail carrying nearly 1,000 French soldiers from the Italian front back to France. It was a wooden train overloaded with only 3 carriages equipped with air brakes, and the remaining 17 carriages had hand brakes or none at all. The train driver protested. He begged the officer to reduce the load. But instead of listening, the superior officer pulled a gun threatening to shoot if the order was not followed. And so the entire train plunged into disaster due to a foolish decision cloaked in honor. They called it duty. In reality, it was an execution. The speed increased as the train climbed the slope. The tracks were slippery due to the snow. The braking system couldn't hold. The carriages screeched, shaking, screaming like souls before being burned alive. As the train passed the Saint-Michel Bridge, it derailed. The first carriage exploded. The wood caught fire. The flames spread to the candles. The candles ignited the weapons. And thus the train turned into an inferno. The soldiers who survived the battlefield were now burned alive by their own commanders. The enemy didn't need to fire a single shot. Some soldiers shot themselves in the head to escape the flames. Others begged their comrades to end their suffering. That wasn't heroism. These were people betrayed. The French government kept the incident quiet. The media was silenced. No one took responsibility. Only silence lasted for 80 years until a faint plaque was erected. When a nation kills its own soldiers and then hides it, it is no longer an accident. It is a betrayal protected by the guise of discipline. Choose obedience or choose life, the price to pay. The M612 incident was not just an accident. It stands as proof of a deadly paradox. Soldiers are taught to obey orders, even when those orders lead to death. No one is allowed to question. No one has the right to refuse. So when the train driver begged to reduce the load, his superior used a gun to silence him. When obedience is the highest standard, life becomes a disposable commodity. The death here was not random. It was an intentional product of irresponsible power. The only resistance came from those who intended to leave the train before it departed. They were confined, threatened, and then burned alive. The question here is not why did the train catch fire, but why was a murderous order protected by the law? In the military, obedience means survival. But what if the order is one of mass suicide? No one is allowed to question, and because of this, the entire system becomes a self-destructive machine no one dares to stop. When the commander survived and was then allowed to keep his position, it sent a terrifying message in war. Deadly mistakes are not crimes as long as they are covered up properly. The public remains unaware. The press is censored. Victims' families receive no compensation. Their names are never mentioned. Only ashes and silence last for centuries. This is not the consequence of war. This is the consequence of a culture that sees power as immune to responsibility. The bloody lessons from 2 disasters and global indifference. From Paralia to Saint-Michel, from Sri Lanka to France, the 2 deadliest train disasters in human history share one common point. The system knew of the danger but did nothing to stop it. And when everything collapsed, they remained silent. They buried the bodies and buried the truth. The stone plaque doesn't speak of the pain. The news broadcast doesn't mention the real cause. And most importantly, no one was punished. Not a single person. When death occurs on a massive scale without accountability, it is no longer a tragedy. It becomes a crime institutionalized. More than a century later, train routes around the world still operate by the protocol. But how many of them have learned the bloody lesson from M612 or T50? How many governments proactively build warning systems? How many operating units dare to train properly on evacuation and emergency response? The truth is, we only do enough to look safe, but never enough to actually save lives. And that is why old disasters keep repeating with new names. The modern world is better at building monuments than warning systems. We remember the victims, but don't change our behavior. We mourn, but don't reform. When the dead are just numbers in a report, the only lesson learned is dying alone. Is an accident dying collectively is called a historical event. And so no one is fired, no one is prosecuted. Only the people continue to believe in the system, and the system keeps pushing them into the next death. Rebellion or obedience, the limits of survival. If you were the driver of the M612 train, what would you do? Stop driving and be shot, or keep driving and die with them? If you were a passenger on the T50 train, what would you do? Argue with the crew and be thrown off, or board the train and hope for the best? These two tragedies raise a painful question. When does a person have the right to rebel? When are you allowed to place your life above the rules? When do you have the right to say no to those who in the name of power push you toward death? We teach people to obey in order to maintain order, but no one teaches how to recognize foolish orders. No one is trained to reject a corrupt system. No one knows what to do when what's right no longer comes from above. So we blame fate, while the truth is, we haven't taught each other how to survive in a world where power itself can be the enemy. And so death doesn't come from the outside, it comes from the resignation within. If you want to survive in this world, learn to rebel, ask questions, demand evidence, learn evacuation procedures, question even when everyone else is silent, because waiting for the system to fix itself is a foolish gamble. History has shown the survivors aren't the strongest. They are the ones who dared to break the rules when the rules became foolish. And that's why silence is no longer moral, it is surrender. Reassessing the concept of accident. To call M612 and T50 accidents is an insult. They were a series of intentional actions, the consequence of which was a massacre. If someone pulls a gun to force you to carry an overloaded train, that is not an accident. If someone knows about a tsunami but doesn't warn others, that is not a natural disaster. When enough people could prevent a tragedy, but no one acts, it is collective complicity. And when an entire system enables it, the concept of accident is just a cover-up to avoid guilt. The most dangerous thing after a disaster is not water, not fire, but quick forgiveness. When we quickly accept the pain, we simultaneously forgive the system that created it. Reassessing the question is not about placing blame, it's about forcing the truth to emerge. Each person who died in these two train incidents is a specific name, a unique life, not just a statistic. And so we must ask again, who killed them, and how do we prevent this from happening again? You can be killed by a bullet, a wave, or by an indifferent order, but the one who kills you in the end will always be the system you dare not question. The lesson from M612 and T50 is not in technology or technique, it is in courage. The courage of each individual when faced with danger, the courage of a community when demanding change, and the courage of a civilization when it dares to say we were wrong and we will not let it happen again. Live as if the system will not save you. The system is not neutral. It is created by humans and maintained by interests. If you don't actively protect yourself, don't expect others to do it for you. History has proven when the wave hits, when the train derails, when foolish orders are given. You can only survive if you are prepared. Prepare your knowledge. Prepare your mind. Prepare to break the rules. Because your life is not in the hands of the government, the military, or the train. It is in your hands, and only yours. Don't wait until an accident happens to learn how to react. Start learning today. Ask yourself, how do I escape if the car sinks? If the train catches fire? If the system remains silent? Survival skills are not a game. They are the bare minimum to avoid being swept away by the foolishness of the majority. And if you lead an organization, ask yourself, if today my system faces a crisis, how many people will die just because they believe everything is fine? Tell the story of M612 and T50. Don't just mourn, don't just remember. Turn their pain into your action. Tell your children, don't believe in default safety. Teach them how to rebel at the right time. Because when history repeats, only those who dare to stand up will have a chance to rewrite the outcome. And if you survive, Tell the world you didn't survive by luck. You survived because you dared to ask questions when everyone else chose silence. Conclusion: there is no natural disaster more devastating than a system without accountability. The tsunami lasted only minutes, but it was the organized apathy, the paralysis, the silence that truly killed a generation. If after everything we still glorify monuments without dismantling the rotten processes behind them, then this tragedy will repeat itself with new names, new victims. This is not a sad story to be forgotten. It is a warning, a wake-up call. The most painful question remains. Next time, who will be the ones boarding that train, while the system still hasn't learned a thing?